welcome everyone to the fourth episode of the Modern Brewer podcast. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about sustainability. Sustainability will be a theme that goes throughout this podcast's life. This is going to be the first episode, so what we're going to do is cover the basics of sustainability, so key terms, key concepts, and ultimately how your brewery could start sustainability today. But first, a big thank you to all of the followers/subscribers that we currently have. I appreciate the nicheness of this topic and subject matter, so to have well over 100 followers feels like a really good achievement. So thank you to everyone who's hit follow and subscribed to the podcast so far. If you haven't, that would be great if you could start. It means you never miss an episode and I don't have to basically push it as much on social media. If that isn't enough to persuade you to hit follow, hopefully the next few topics will. So the topics coming up will be data management in the brewing process. We have also an episode on regenerative agriculture and regenerative barley, and also an episode that will be entitled When to Move Brewery, which is going to be exciting because we're going to go through when, if, and how you should leave your brewery. So hit subscribe/follow and you will never miss any of those great topics. So with me today, I have Chris Terry. I actually met him by being added into a decarbonating the brewing industry WhatsApp group, which is pretty cool. We actually originally recorded this episode a few months back, but the ever-changing landscape of sustainability outdated the content pretty quickly. So thank you to Chris Terry for the incredible patience he has shown to re-record this episode with me. So to start afresh, you might be wondering, who is Chris Terry? So Chris Terry is a researcher focusing on environmental sustainability and circular economy. He supports projects in the areas of sustainable food and beverage production and hospitality, including life cycle assessments, carbon footprinting, and carbon literacy training. Chris has over a decade of international experience in hospitality management and brewery business development. He used the 2020 lockdown to study a master's in sustainability and consultancy at the University of Leeds. He has contributed to research publications for Food Service Footprint, worked with the likes of Murphy & Son, North Brewing Co. and eBrewer Trade. Chris is a registered environmental practitioner, IEMA member, certified Cicerone, and an international beer judge. So, welcome to the show, Chris Terry.
Thanks, Chris. It's great to be back. Yeah, like you say, it changed so quickly, didn't it, of some of the things we were talking about on that previous recording. So good to be back and update the record.
Yeah, I mean, for clarity, it was actually mainly focused around the DRS, the deposit return scheme that was happening. We were discussing at the time, and then that landscape changed about 4 times in the space from April to now. So I think we may just kick it off. Like, why is sustainability an important topic?
Oh, why? I mean, why isn't it? It's kind of apt that we're re-recording this now. We've just had mercury-shattering temperatures recorded all around the globe, and I recently heard it all the sort of climate change stuff reframed as this won't be remembered as one of the warmest years on record, but in 25 years this could be one of the coolest, most comfortable, least disrupted summers we ever got to enjoy. And that's, I haven't really worked out what to do with all of that shame and guilt and anger that's brought up inside me, that, we've got to take some action so that we can look forward to summer and we can look forward to having access to great ingredients and not being disrupted in our ingredients and our supply chains. And I try not to be doom-laden about a lot of this stuff, and sustainability is a wide topic, and there's lots of things that we're moving in the right directions of, but there's some environmental things we really need to move faster on, and that's why it's a really important topic that we start talking about it, start taking the actions that we need to take, so that we can enjoy summer, not dread it.
Absolutely. So actually, what made you get into sustainability in the first place?
So around 2019, I was with eBrewer Trade and I was talking to venues and breweries about some of these issues, about some of these environmental issues. And lots of people were saying, we want to do something, or we know we should do something, but we've got no idea where to start. We don't know what the tools are. We don't know where the resources are. We could do with some extra money and some time to do it. So I said, let's go find out. Let's go have a look what's out there. Let's see what's available. Let's see what other sectors are doing, and by doing the masters, that kind of fast tracked a lot of information to me of what's going on in the landscape, what the policy landscape is, what the kind of future holds for sustainability. Coming out of lockdown and coming out of the masters, I've been able to hopefully share some of that information with breweries.
And so, what do you do in sustainability at the moment?
So I offer an accredited carbon literacy training program, which brings breweries and other organisations up to a level of understanding of what climate change is, what the science is behind it, why it's important to take action, and what opportunities there are available on a local, national, international level for both individuals and groups to take action on sustainability and take action on reducing their carbon footprint. And that opens the door to more technical things that I work on, from life cycle assessments of hops to carbon footprinting of breweries to decarbonisation strategies, and loads of other stuff in between. But yeah, a broad spectrum.
That's awesome. So, let's go through some of the key terms of carbon literacy. Is, I think, a really good aim for this podcast is to try to get every single person onto the same base level of understanding of the terms of sustainability. It can be quite a lot, and it can be quite daunting. And a lot of the times previously I would be like, yeah, I understand what that means, and I'd be like Googling it down on my phone below. So let's start with the 3 pillars of sustainability, which is kind of like the crux of sustainability.
The 3 pillars of sustainability are people, planet, and profits. So it's not about reducing your profit to a point where your business becomes unsustainable in order to service the needs of the people and planet around you. It's not about exploiting the people and planet resources that you require to run your business in order to maximize your profit. It's about considering each of those 3 pillars equally and going forward with a business that meets the demands of each of them.
Excellent. So what is net zero or net negative?
So this is when we talk about carbon emissions, and everything that we do, every activity that we participate in, every product that we buy or sell has a carbon footprint. There is carbon emissions associated with everything that we do in our everyday lives. And if we take action to reduce the emissions from that activity or from that product, we can say that it is carbon neutral, that the emissions from the product or service have been offset or reduced to a point where they remove as much carbon dioxide from the atmosphere as they create. And you've got 2 strategies of doing that, of reducing the amount of carbon dioxide that it produces, or offsetting or taking other actions such as carbon capture or sequestration. So net zero is balancing the books of the 2 sides, and then net negative is taking it even further and actually taking more carbon out of the atmosphere than putting into it.
And leading on to that, what is offsetting? And next part, is it contentious?
Oh God, yeah, it's a tricky topic with lots of arguments on both sides, I think. And what offsetting does is it's like buying a little permit that says, I've emitted some carbon, I want to take some carbon out somewhere else. So you could buy a tree planting scheme so that a tree is planted that captures the carbon. You could invest in a clean stove scheme that gives clean burning stoves to developing countries, so they're not using coal or other kind of dirty fossil fuel powered stoves for their cooking and household needs. Or it could be something in between. There's lots of stuff out there, and there are various frameworks and standards for accrediting what good carbon offsetting can be. Things like gold standards show that an offsetting scheme is worth investing in. Is it contentious? Certainly, if it's used to distract, or it's being used as a means to claim carbon neutrality or carbon negativity without taking the actions to reduce the carbon footprint, I think most people would agree that that's when the contention starts, that it's not being used responsibly. I'll throw it back to you, Chris. What do you think of offsetting?
Yeah, very similar opinion. It's a natural part of having a net zero, especially brewery, because it's going to be quite difficult to physically actually get there. Is it contentious? Only when used as a marketing ploy, I guess, is exactly what you've said. There's some processes that are just very unlikely to become net zero or net negative with what is available to them, breweries being one of them. So I think that offsetting is probably a natural part of getting to net zero. But ultimately, it's the same with everything in sustainability, as long as it's actually being done and is being done in the right way.
Yeah, I'd agree, and I think the message that I'd want to get out to breweries is that it doesn't need to be net zero or nothing tomorrow, as long as you're taking steps in the right direction and working towards a greener brewery with lower carbon emissions. If that's in the future, then great, that's fantastic. You're on the right track. You don't have to achieve net zero tomorrow, and offsetting I think is offering that shortcut that maybe just isn't necessary if you're moving in the right direction. I don't know if that's maybe just a personal opinion, but certainly I'd like to see more conversation started about it.
Actually puts me straight onto the next question. So, what are kilos of CO2 equivalent or CO2e?
So you might see this this term in carbon footprints or other reports and things, and yeah, a kilogram of carbon dioxide equivalent CO2e is what we use to measure the carbon footprint of things, because we know that there are other greenhouse gases that are causing climate change. There's methane, there's nitrous oxide in the atmosphere, and those have a much higher what we call global warming potential, which means that they hang around in the atmosphere for a lot longer than carbon dioxide does. So we do some clever calculations, and we calculate the equivalence of those other greenhouse gases to a carbon dioxide equivalent. And so that we can talk about things in just one figure rather than reporting the carbon footprint, the methane footprint, etc., etc., etc.
Excellent. Yeah, really good explanation. So, what is greenwashing and what is green hushing?
So I'll start with greenwashing, and this is going back to some of the things we were saying about offsetting, is when you're using green claims or environmental claims as a distraction or a bit of sleight of hand to maybe make yourself look a little bit better than you actually are. It's an example I like to talk about is for my sins, I took a flight recently, and there was a glossy magazine in the back of the seat proclaiming how the airline had reduced all of its ground operations to carbon neutral. Didn't mention a lot about the flights though, and it was a very glossy green font, green boxes, look at how green we are statement that they'd made, but had completely ignored, or certainly not mentioned the flights. And the problem with greenwashing for me is that it's making people worried about putting out claims, and making people worried about talking about what they're doing because they're worried about being accused of greenwashing. And green hushing is this thing that I've only heard about in the last year or so, of people actually staying quiet about what they're doing. And this is, we need to come together, we need to form partnerships, we need to form collaborations, we need to have these discussions about the actions that we're taking and talking about the impacts that these actions are having, not keeping it behind closed doors because we're worried about what the social media might say, or what the press might come at us with. So that's green hushing, and that's where we are with that. And there's various ways of making sure that what you're saying isn't going to be accused of greenwashing, or hopefully isn't going to be accused of greenwashing. And a great way to start is with the CMA's guidelines on the topic, and they set out what a green claim should be, the things that you can and can't say.
Okay, so now we move on to the last one of this section. What is scope 1, 2, and 3, and how do they affect a brewery?
Yeah, so with a carbon footprint or a decarbonisation strategy, we break down the emissions from the brewery into three scopes or activities. And in your first scope, scope one, you've got direct emissions from firing off a fossil fuel boiler, from firing up your diesel-powered transport vehicles, and those are the direct emissions that you cause as a brewery. In scope 2, you've got indirect emissions from the electricity and gas that you purchase from your energy supplier. And then the third scope is basically everything else. So it's everything that your suppliers do, it's everything your employees do, everything your customers do in order to make your brewery run. What is going on around the world and that's contributing to your carbon footprint at your brewery. So by breaking it down into those three scopes, we can examine them individually and target the hotspots in each area. And it also helps us talk to our suppliers and say, we're trying to reduce our scope 3 emissions. What are you doing to reduce your scope 1 emissions? Because their emissions might be a lot higher than the brewery's contribution to it. And the reports are saying that scope 3 can be 80 or 90% of a brewery's emissions. So it's really not something to be ignored. And what we need to see is people taking action on their scope 1 and 2 so that we can get to all taking collective action on scope 3 a lot faster.
Yeah, it's a really nice thing. Since I've been working with Zero, who do carbon accountancy for breweries, I've actually get to see firsthand a lot of data, and it's fascinating to see. Exactly right, 80 to 90% of a brewery's total emissions are the things that they purchase and associated with their supply chain. I actually recently did a talk, and I have this donut that I got from Severo, unfortunately not the delicious treat, but the chart. And on a generalized scale, there's three biggest contributors to a brewery's emissions, and they are the ingredients that you purchase, which is about 30%, and then packaging materials that you buy, which is about another 30%, and then the company facilities, which is everything that's actually happening that brewers can see. That's only 15% of your total emissions. And then a bit less is transport, and then use of sold goods and end of life. But I think it's a really interesting exercise to do, because often people think either transport or company facilities are probably their biggest emissions factor. I would say partly that's because that's what they can see, whereas ingredients is something that happens downstream or upstream. People don't see that, but actually of that 30% of ingredients, I think about 15 to 20% of that is the malted barley that you buy. So it's really interesting, actually. It's quite difficult because scope 3 is really hard to calculate. So it's a lot easier to focus on your scope 1 and 2. I actually recently heard someone say that if everyone focused on their scope 1 and 2, then you wouldn't have to worry about your scope 3, which is quite an interesting mindset.
It's exactly right. Yeah, and brewers might be listening to this and thinking, well, God, if everything that I'm buying in I is completely my carbon footprint is completely outside of my control because of how much is coming from upstream from the ingredients that I buy. I can't change the ingredients that I buy. You can have conversations with your suppliers about their scope 1 and 2 though, because if they take action to reduce their direct emissions, then your indirect emissions as a brewer are going to come down.
Yeah, and it was really interesting as well with transport for me. Transport is the one that's demonized quite regularly in the press, and you think, if I can reduce my transport distance, then that will better off my carbon footprint. And I recently wrote an article, you can check it out on my website, the Brewer Resource website, but I was interested because I was considering, if you're a brewery and you're in the UK, you should be buying your bittering hops from a UK hop producer, because it will reduce that transport from over in Yakima Valley in Washington or from Germany. And I was basically set out to write this article to be like, get your bittering hops from the UK. And so I started to do some research. A big caveat is this, as you know, Chris, there's not significant amounts of really hard, good, strong data coming from a lot of places, and a lot of it is a bit of generalization. But it was actually better for your brewery's carbon footprint to import your hops from Germany or America than it is to have them grown in the UK, which I just found like I remember starting being like, whoa, this is crazy. And you can check out the numbers. That, as I said, there's nothing is like hard and fast, and everything's quite generalized. It's not like farm level data available yet, but it's really interesting to see, and that's included refrigerated containers coming from Yakima. It's actually better for the environment. So. In a way, in a short-term way, but yeah, it's quite interesting. And as I said, the things in the news make you really demonize certain things when actually the problem is elsewhere. Um,
Yeah, that's really interesting. We started this episode talking about how quickly things change, and it's not so also long ago when the focus was on food miles and getting things from as local sources as possible. But you're absolutely right, Chris. Sometimes going a little bit further because they've got slightly different practices in, or they've got a better climate for it, and therefore they don't need as many agricultural inputs into the growing of the hops, which means that we can get hops from abroad at a lower environmental cost than we can get from down the road, which is crazy to think if we're just focusing on food miles. So sustainability has to be this really wide view of things. You can't just blinker in on one metric at all, which makes things more difficult, unfortunately.
yeah, it really is a bit of a minefield. We almost endlessly read negative news in regards to climate change and sustainability. And I know I speak to a lot of brewers and people in life, and they often say, does one person really make a difference? And to keep it relevant, do you think like one brewery can make a difference?
Oh, absolutely. I think everyone can get involved in this and be talking about this, and I think we have to be talking about this. I don't think anyone gets to sit themselves out just because they're too small to make a difference. And this is something that we try and push on the carbon literacy training course, is that everyone, the tools and resources are out there to help everyone from individuals to group level to national, getting national involvement in movements to make a difference. And I totally get the sentiment that people feel too small to make a difference, because some of the things that are talked about in climate change are so far off in the distance, and this is the threat of the horizon, that what happens today trumps what's happening on the horizon. And we're talking about rising temperature year on year, we're talking about rising sea levels, we're talking about biodiversity loss, and everything is so far in the distance. But it's gonna get to us a lot sooner than we possibly think. And the way to kind of link up all of this thinking to feel like all of this is relevant is to start talking about it now. And that's the power of the individual, is to have the conversations, to not trivialize the climate change that we're seeing outside our windows and around the world, is to really look at these things as, is this the future that we want? Is this the outcome that we want from the activities that we're involved in? Do we want to be able to brew the beer that we're brewing today in the future? Then I, as an individual, need to take action to make sure that that's still the case.
Yeah, and human beings are quite often reactive rather than proactive, as probably one of the main reasons we are getting into this situation. But yeah, it's all really interesting to me, because does one person make a difference? The realistic answer is no, that one person doesn't make a difference, but it's the collection of everyone making the effort that does make the difference. And having that mentality that I don't make the difference, it doesn't really work. It's the same thing as my vote doesn't matter. It's the same principle, where actually, of course, it does matter in the long run. But I can see why people are like, well, what I'm doing today isn't making a big difference because it's just one thing. And I also see a lot of people demonizing people who are championing sustainability for not being perfect. And they almost using that as, if person X, Y, and Z isn't being perfect, then what's the point? There's a zero food waste chef, she's called Anne-Marie, and she had this great quote that I've seen plastered around. We don't need a handful of people doing zero waste perfectly. We need millions of people doing it imperfectly. I really like that mentality of no one's trying to be perfect,
Absolutely, and I think this is the danger of greenwashing and the green hushing that it's created, is that people are worried about standing up and saying, this is what we're doing as a brewery, this is what I'm doing as an individual. People are embarrassed to talk about what they're doing because the threat of being accused of not doing it perfectly, and we can't let perfection stand in the way of good when it comes to these actions. on an individual level, something I really like to think about is Tim Berners-Lee's 10-ton lifestyle of if everything I do has a carbon footprint in the way that everything I eat has a calorific value. If I think of it, if I've got an annual diet of 10 tons of carbon, and then I can make choices that keep me under that 10 tons. So if that means that I want to keep eating a meat forward diet, then maybe I need to have a look at the size of my car and maybe switch to an electric vehicle. If I want to keep taking long haul flights, then maybe I should think about a plant based diet in order to balance out my average annual carbon footprint. And if everyone did that in the country, I mean, that's cutting 2 tons out of, or more, 2 tons out of everyone's footprint in the UK. So each individual is having a huge impact on the wider requirements of reducing the national carbon footprint.
That's really interesting. I've never heard that. That's really cool. Moving on and keeping on the food theme, sustainability is often taught in like the carrot or stick method. There's the opportunity that sustainability creates, but there's also this seemingly now is an ever looming stick. What are your opinions on this? Do you have any ideas on what sort of opportunities sustainability can present to people and to brewers?
Yeah, there's huge co-benefits to taking action on sustainability. There's cost saving benefits, there's health saving benefits, there's if it's handled right, the marketing opportunity of being able to talk to consumers that want to buy more environmentally consciously and know that the products and services they're buying have been bought with consideration of the people and planet around them. Then yeah, there's definitely some opportunities to take an action on this. And what is available right now are carrots. There is pots of money, there are local resources, there are industry resources, there are people like ourselves, Chris, out there trying to talk to people and say, we're ready to help you, we're here, we've got some ideas, let us come into your brewery and have a chat with you and tell you about what opportunities there are to take action on this. And yeah, the stick is there though, and legislation might come in, and new rules and requirements might come in the future. And also, if we lose access to some of the brilliant ingredients that we currently have because of climate change, because of the rise of pests and disease and more difficult growing conditions, that's a threat of sustainability as well. So really, we should be looking at these carrots and taking advantage of them as a sector before the stick of it comes from behind and challenges us and makes it a more difficult trading conditions than they already are.
Yeah, and right now there's a lot of eco-consumerism in it, and it's on the rise. So there was a good article, I think it was in the Grocer, that was not that long ago, and it was like 34% of Brits are willing to spend more on sustainable options when out in the pubs. It's quite a huge statistic, really, especially when Gen Z and millennials are leading that way, and that 47% of those are willing to invest in greener choices. And what you got to remember is, in my opinion, one of the larger issues of the brewing world is that Gen Z and millennial drinkers are drinking less, especially Gen Z drinking significantly less, which really would dictate the future of the market. So right now, obviously, it's not having a huge impact, but give that 10, 15, 20 years when that generation's moving forward and now other generations are moving on, you're going to see a dwindling market. So I think that's a really important sector to try and capture quite early on. And eco-consumerism and the fact that they're willing to invest in green choices, I think, is a huge carrot on the end of that.
Yeah, absolutely. As people, brewers want green skills, and they want to get their staff trained up on the green skills that they need in order to think about this future prospects. Yeah, and just to touch on that, the Gen Z and millennial movement is that we're not seeing diets switch to 100% plant-based. What we're seeing is a rise in flexitarianism and people reducing their meat intake. So people aren't looking for this 100% perfection in their individual lifestyles. They're looking for the switches that need to be made that still allow them a full life. And that's a great way of approaching sustainability, I think, is, everything in moderation, including moderation.
Yeah, I really like that. Everything in moderation, including moderation. So, what are your thoughts on the threat of sustainability? I know we touch it with the stick. There's a lot coming in now, so there'll be changes in macro policies that directly influence business and maybe not brewery specific for now because it's quite a small sector, but business in general. When we've already seen the aforementioned DRS system, but do you have any other examples of macro policies that would directly influence business?
Yeah, I think we're going to see more focus on SMEs. I think we've seen it trialed with larger transnational corporations of making sure that they're reporting on their carbon footprints, that they are taking regular audits of their businesses and their premises to make sure that they are as green as they possibly can be. An example of this is the EPC legislation that's coming soon, and landlords will have to make sure that their premises are up to a certain environmental standard of efficiency, or face fines and not be able to let their premises out. So we're gonna see these bits of legislation trickle through to us very soon, I think. Another one is the ban on internal combustion engine cars in the next 10 years, and everyone, we drive a petrol Golf, so we'll need to look at that in the not too distant future to make sure that we're not breaking the rules.
Yeah, and indirectly related to breweries would be supermarkets as well. They're getting quite a significant amount of pressure from the government now on their carbon emissions, and what supermarkets are infamous for doing as soon as they have a problem put on them is they push that straight down their supply chain. So you're seeing now that they're having requirements. The manufacture 2030 that's there, but these are going to get stricter, and I believe that there's going to be a good amount of competition. They're going to make their supply chain compete on carbon emissions. So it's both a threat and an opportunity, because there's a threat there that supermarkets are very quickly going to be like, okay, we need you to have this net zero plan, and we also need to see your current emissions, what they are, and then they can just compete because it's a number. So they can be like, well, we want more from brewery A or brewery B because they're actually doing better with the carbon emissions. So I think it offers both a threat to the people who are very reliant on supermarkets who aren't particularly doing a huge amount of sustainability, but then of course on the other side it offers a huge opportunity to brewers who are championing sustainability now, and those and they're after supermarket contracts. I think that could be a big one for them in the future.
Absolutely, yeah. Anyone that can remember back to the early 2000s in brewing will remember how much health and safety became a massive sticking point for a lot of supermarkets, and they were asking questions of their suppliers to make sure that they had SALSA accreditation or a particular ISO, and that's, I think, something we're going to see if it hasn't already started for the big supermarkets in the near future. We're going to see supermarkets saying, no, you've got to have a carbon reduction policy in place. You've got to show us that you are green, that you have green credentials, because we've got pressure. We, the supermarkets, are having pressure put on ourselves as well.
I really like that parallel between health and safety and sustainability, because although it feels a bit crazy now, I think that's definitely the route and that's the path that it's going on, which is really interesting.
Yeah, and for brewers, there is a challenge in picking the right accreditation, I think, and finding a framework that works for your brewery. And there's things out there like B Corp and the Carbon Trust carbon footprinting labels and soil association marks, and if you're a brewery, which ones you go after and which ones do you invest in, because some of these are expensive schemes, and the cost involved in meeting the requirements of some of these schemes is quite high and almost prohibitively high, depending on your business and your structure. And my recommendation to brewers is to find something that works for your organisation, and almost come up with the answer for yourself, and then find a model that works, rather than trying to shoehorn yourself into an accreditation because you think it's the one to go for. develop something for yourself in house, and then find an accreditation that matches it.
Yeah, so leading on, like, how can breweries take action on sustainability? Let's say you're a brewery now and you've listened to this and you're like, okay, I'm ready. What do you think is the first thing to do, and when should they start?
Start with a conversation. Start with if you're working on the brewery floor, talk to your managers, talk to the brewery owners, talk to different departments. If you are running the brewery, then talk to your staff and talk to other. Talk to your neighbours as well. Talk to people in different sectors. Talk to everyone else in the industrial estate and say, what are you doing? Is there anything that we can work together on? And if you find those conversations are stalling because you don't know where to talk or how to talk about these things, and you're finding a load of jargon come up that you're not really sure about, that you're getting right, then this is what we look to tackle on the carbon literacy course, is talking about some of these terms and some of these options that are available, and breaking down some of the resources, and looking at how breweries can approach them and how they can take advantage of them. So there's some really great low-hanging fruit that I think breweries can take advantage of. I think there are some local resources, there's some pots of money and grants available, and sometimes they can be a little bit tricky to find, but just have a conversation with your local authority, because they've all got targets they want to meet in reducing carbon emissions in their area. Just start with conversations. Just start with conversations among the team. Start to incorporate sustainability and carbon emissions into your KPIs and your metrics that you discuss on a regular basis. And talk to your neighbours as well. Talk to people in other sectors. Talk to people around the industrial estate. Are there things that you can all invest in together and all benefit from? Can you all invest in a solar panel array, or an anaerobic digestion, or come together to purchase more environmentally friendly packaging? I think start with conversations. And this is something, again, that we look at on the carbon literacy training course, is how to talk about some of these things, and how to understand some of the jargon that surrounds these things, and then go and access the opportunities that are available. How about you, Chris? What your top tips for brewers?
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, I'm operations focused, so my tip is to start with a simple but powerful concept: resourcefulness. Consume less and produce more with what you have. I define resourcefulness with 5 key metrics: so your brewhouse efficiency, water consumption, electricity consumption, gas consumption, and CO2 consumption. Now that you have these, you need to follow like a basic continuous improvement model, which is measure, benchmark, reduce. So now you have your 5 key metrics and you've measured them. You then benchmark them against either your own results or other breweries' results, and then you can start to reduce, because you can basically just see where that low-hanging fruit is and where you should focus your attention to maximize your rewards. As I said, really simple. So my company, which is Brew Resourceful, now I appreciate it's probably the second time I've plugged that in this episode. The Brew Resourceful has loads of free tools, tips and information on becoming more resourceful. It also offers a free benchmarking tool to compare your breweries with over 50 craft breweries, which is pretty sweet. Another tip would be, don't be afraid of sustainability being profitable. Just like you mentioned earlier, Chris, the 3 pillars of sustainability, profit isn't a dirty word and actually should work in line with planet or with your sustainability program. A really simple example I always use is, if you increase your brewhouse efficiency by 5%, you've just reduced your malt consumption by 5%. That will impact your cash flow that month because you buy 5% less malt. Malted barley is one of the biggest contributors to your business's carbon footprint. So about 15% of your total emissions come from your malted barley consumption. So reducing your malt reduces your brewery's carbon footprint measurably. And none of what I'm saying actually requires any financial investment. Just invest your time into wasting less. And as for when to start this, it has to start today. The idea of waiting till tomorrow is kind of why it's become such an important topic. Action has to start today.
100%. Yeah, I agree with that. And, if we were in a situation where we'd started a lot of these actions 10, 15 years ago, we could maybe take the foot off the brake now, but the foot off the accelerator now. But that's not the situation we're in. And we're on course for some sweltering hot next few years because of human caused climate change. And something needs to be done.
Amen to that. So, Chris, I mean, is there anything else you'd like to add to this pod?
No, it's just thanks for having me on again, and yeah, really enjoying the series of people that you're getting in and speaking to, and getting great messages out there to breweries. So yeah, full support for what you're doing, Chris, and yeah, hopefully see you for a pint maybe at London Craft Beer Festival soon.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks again for coming on twice and only getting one amount of airtime. Really do appreciate that. And I'll definitely grab you for a beer. That sounds great to me. And yeah, thank you so much for coming on. I really hope everyone enjoyed today's episode. Of course, if there's any opportunity for you to hit that follow or subscribe button and join over 100 followers that we currently have, I think it's great. Definitely helps me out. I really hope that the information you're getting and the content you're listening to is good and you're taking stuff away. So please, follow, tell your friends. We're a small industry, so it doesn't take many people. Hopefully they can benefit from this as well. So yeah, thank you so much to everyone, and yeah, enjoy the next episode. See you later.